There's a generation of Americans who remember sitting at their grandmother's Sunday dinner table eating casseroles from handwritten recipe cards, and a generation who've never tasted one. If you're the first one, this is for you. Husband's Delight and Shipwreck Casserole. Dishes that filled church potluck tables and family dinner tables from the 1950s to the 1980s until convenience foods, takeout, and busy schedules quietly swept them off American tables and pretended they never existed. These are 30 forgotten heirloom casseroles no one passes down anymore, and we should never let them disappear. Husband's Delight turned ground beef and egg noodles into the casserole that made men actually ask for seconds at church suppers across the Midwest. This recipe circulated through women's circles in the 1950s, passed on index cards over backyard fences and at TA meetings. Ground beef was browned with diced onions until fragrant, then drained to remove excess grease. Cooked egg noodles were folded into the beef along with sour cream and cream cheese that melted into creamy richness. A can of condensed tomato soup added just enough acidity to balance the dairy. The mixture went into a buttered casserole dish and was topped with shredded cheddar cheese. It baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheese bubbled and turned golden at the edges. The whole dish cost less than $2 and fed 6 people easily. The name came from husbands who genuinely looked forward to eating leftovers the next day. Husband's Delight represented how homemakers stretched budgets without sacrificing flavor or satisfaction. Golden Hash Brown Bake appeared at every significant gathering where comfort mattered more than sophistication throughout the American heartland. This casserole came from church cookbook collections in the 1960s, where it carried different names depending on which state you lived in. Frozen hash browns were thawed and mixed with sour cream, cream of chicken soup, and melted butter that coated every shredded potato strand. Finely diced onion added sharpness, while shredded cheddar cheese provided richness and helped bind everything together. The mixture was spread into a greased baking dish and topped with crushed cornflakes mixed with more melted butter. It baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes until the cornflake topping turned deep golden and crunchy. The contrast between crispy top and creamy interior made every bite satisfying. The whole casserole cost under $3 and could feed 10 people at a funeral lunch. Golden Hash Brown Bake showed how simple ingredients became memorable when combined with care and baked with patience. Sunday Spaghetti Bake fed families after morning church services when mothers needed something that could go straight from refrigerator to oven without fuss. This casserole appeared in community fundraiser cookbooks across the South during the 1960s. Spaghetti was cooked until just tender, then drained and set aside to cool slightly. Ground beef was browned with chopped onions and green bell peppers until the vegetables softened. A can of condensed cheddar cheese soup was stirred into the beef along with diced tomatoes and a dash of Worcestershire sauce. The cooked spaghetti was folded into this mixture until every strand was coated. Everything went into a greased casserole dish and was topped with more shredded cheddar cheese. It baked at 350 degrees for 35 minutes until the edges bubbled and the cheese melted into golden pools. This dish cost less than $3 and stretched 1 pound of meat to feed 8 people. Sunday spaghetti bake proved that Italian-inspired comfort could be achieved with American convenience ingredients. Before we continue, Midwest Noodle Casserole carried the name Johnny Marzetti in Ohio and Indiana, where Italian immigrants adapted their pasta traditions to American Midwestern kitchens. This recipe traveled through generations of handwritten cards tucked into wooden recipe boxes throughout the 1950s. Ground beef was browned with diced onions until deeply caramelized, then drained of excess fat. Egg noodles were cooked al dente and mixed with the seasoned beef. Canned tomato sauce was stirred in along with dried oregano, garlic powder, and black pepper. Sharp cheddar cheese was folded through the mixture, saving some for the top layer. Everything was transferred to a buttered casserole dish and covered with the remaining cheese. It baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheese melted and started to brown. The whole dish cost under $2 and fed a family of 6 with leftovers. Midwest Noodle Casserole showed how immigrant traditions merged with American practicality to create something entirely new and deeply comforting.
Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue.
Creamy Ritz chicken bake elevated simple chicken breasts into special occasion food that tasted far fancier than the effort required to make it. This recipe came from the back of Ritz cracker boxes in the 1960s and was immediately clipped and saved by homemakers. Chicken breasts were arranged in a single layer in a buttered baking dish. Cream of chicken soup was spooned over the chicken, covering each piece completely. Ritz crackers were crushed into coarse crumbs and mixed with melted butter until every crumb glistened. The buttery cracker mixture was sprinkled generously over the soup-covered chicken. It baked at 350 degrees for 40 minutes until the chicken cooked through and the topping turned golden brown. The crackers created a crunchy crust that contrasted beautifully with the creamy soup underneath. The whole casserole cost around $3 and fed a family of 4 comfortably. Creamy Ritz chicken bake demonstrated how branded products shaped American home cooking through simple recipes that delivered consistent results every single time. Rehook: 5 forgotten casseroles that fed America when handwritten recipes mattered more than celebrity chefs. From husband's delight to creamy Ritz chicken bake, each dish stretched budgets and filled tables. These weren't just recipes. They were survival strategies wrapped in cream of mushroom soup. 25 more casseroles still wait to be remembered. Three-cheese chicken casserole brought richness to Sunday dinners when families needed something that tasted expensive but cost almost nothing to make. This recipe circulated through church ladies' networks in the 1970s, written on cards stained with butter and cream. Cooked chicken was shredded or diced into bite-sized pieces and spread across a buttered casserole dish. Cream cheese was softened and beaten with cottage cheese until relatively smooth and creamy. Sour cream was folded into the cheese mixture along with dried onion flakes and garlic powder. This creamy base was poured over the chicken, coating every piece completely. Egg noodles were cooked until tender, drained, and layered on top of the chicken mixture. More sour cream was dolloped across the noodles, then shredded cheddar cheese covered everything. Pineapple casserole confused newcomers at Southern church potlucks, who couldn't decide if it belonged with vegetables or desserts on crowded buffet tables. This recipe appeared in community cookbooks across the South during the 1950s and sparked strong opinions about proper placement. Canned pineapple chunks were drained thoroughly and spread across a buttered baking dish. Granulated sugar was sprinkled over the pineapple to enhance its natural sweetness. All-purpose flour was mixed with the sugar to create binding that would thicken during baking. Sharp cheddar cheese was shredded and layered over the flour-sugar mixture in generous amounts. Ritz crackers were crushed coarsely and mixed with melted butter until every crumb glistened. The buttery cracker topping was spread evenly across the cheese layer. It baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheese melted and the crackers turned golden brown. The combination of sweet pineapple and sharp cheddar created flavor contrast that divided families for generations. Squash casserole rescued summer garden surplus when zucchini and yellow squash grew faster than families could eat them fresh from backyard plots. This recipe circulated through farming communities during the 1960s when vegetable gardens provided essential budget relief. Yellow squash was sliced thin and boiled until just tender, then drained completely to prevent watery casserole. Chopped onion was sauteed in butter until soft and translucent. The cooked squash was mashed roughly with a fork and mixed with the sauteed onion. Eggs were beaten and stirred into the squash along with sour cream and shredded cheddar cheese. Salt and black pepper seasoned the mixture simply. Everything went into a buttered casserole dish. Herb stuffing mix was crushed and mixed with melted butter, then spread across the top. It baked at 350 degrees for 35 minutes until the stuffing turned golden and the edges bubbled. Corn pudding appeared at Thanksgiving tables across the South when families wanted something between cornbread and casserole that satisfied both cravings simultaneously. This recipe came from farmhouse kitchens in the 1950s where corn was abundant and recipes needed to use it creatively. A box of Jiffy corn muffin mix was poured into a large mixing bowl. Cans of whole kernel corn and creamed corn were added without draining. Eggs were beaten and mixed in along with melted butter and sour cream. The batter was thinner than regular cornbread, but thicker than custard. Everything was poured into a buttered baking dish and stirred gently to distribute ingredients evenly. It baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes until the top turned golden and a knife inserted in the center came out clean. Tuna noodle casserole fed families on Friday nights throughout the 1950s when Catholic households needed meatless meals that children would actually eat willingly. This recipe came from the back of Campbell's soup cans and became the most requested casserole in American history. Egg noodles were cooked until tender, then drained and set aside to cool slightly. Cans of tuna packed in water were drained and flaked with a fork. Cream of mushroom soup was mixed with milk until smooth and pourable. The noodles and tuna were folded into the soup mixture along with frozen peas. Everything went into a buttered casserole dish. Crushed potato chips were scattered across the top in an even layer. It baked at 350 degrees for 25 minutes until the edges bubbled and the chips turned golden. 10 heirloom casseroles down, 20 still waiting. From husband's delight to tuna noodle casserole, each dish told stories of church suppers and Sunday dinners. These recipes stretched gardens and budgets into meals that fed families completely. The next 20 casseroles reveal even more forgotten American food history worth remembering. Noodle kugel carried Jewish tradition into American kitchens, where it became the casserole that confused non-Jewish neighbors at potlucks who couldn't figure out if it was dessert or side dish. This recipe traveled from Eastern European grandmothers through Ellis Island and into suburban recipe boxes during the 1950s. Wide egg noodles were boiled until tender, then drained and rinsed with cold water to stop the cooking. Cottage cheese was beaten with eggs until relatively smooth and creamy. Sour cream was folded into the cottage cheese mixture along with granulated sugar and vanilla extract. Melted butter was stirred in to add richness. The cooked noodles were combined with the cheese mixture, tossing gently to coat every strand. Raisins were folded through for sweetness and texture. Everything was poured into a buttered baking dish. The top was sprinkled with cinnamon sugar and dotted with extra butter. It baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes until the top turned golden and slightly crispy at the edges. Shipwreck casserole earned its name from the way ingredients were layered like cargo in a ship's hold, each component contributing to survival during hard times. This recipe circulated through Midwestern farming communities and stayed popular through the 1960s. Raw ground beef was crumbled and spread across the bottom of a greased casserole dish without browning first. Uncooked white rice was sprinkled over the raw meat in an even layer. Chopped onions and sliced celery were scattered across the rice. Kidney beans were drained and layered on top of the vegetables. Diced potatoes went on next, creating another distinct layer. Canned tomatoes were poured over everything, juice and all, to provide moisture for cooking. Salt, black pepper, and a dash of Worcestershire sauce seasoned the whole thing. More canned tomatoes or tomato juice was added if the liquid didn't quite cover all the layers. The dish was covered tightly with aluminum foil to trap steam. It baked at 350 degrees for 90 minutes until the rice and potatoes cooked through completely. Creamy chicken spaghetti bake transformed leftover Sunday chicken into Monday night supper that tasted completely different from the day before. This recipe came from Southern church cookbooks in the 1960s, where it was called chicken tetrazzini by some and chicken spaghetti by others. Spaghetti was cooked until just tender, then drained and rinsed to prevent sticking. Cooked chicken was shredded or diced into bite-sized pieces. Butter was melted in a large skillet and used to saute diced onions and sliced mushrooms until soft. Flour was stirred into the vegetables to create a roux. Chicken broth was added gradually, whisking constantly to prevent lumps. Heavy cream was stirred in along with a splash of dry sherry that added sophisticated depth. The sauce was seasoned with salt, white pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg. Shredded Parmesan cheese was stirred into the sauce until melted. The cooked spaghetti and chicken were folded into the creamy sauce. Everything went into a buttered casserole dish. More Parmesan cheese was sprinkled on top, along with breadcrumbs mixed with melted butter. It baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the sauce bubbled and the topping turned golden brown. Tennessee onions became viral on social media in 2024, but originated in Southern church cookbooks decades earlier, where they were simply called baked Vidalia onions. This recipe celebrated the sweet Vidalia onions grown in Georgia that transformed into something magical when baked with butter and cheese. Large Vidalia onions were peeled and sliced into thick rounds about half an inch thick. The onion slices were arranged in a single layer and a buttered baking dish. Melted butter was drizzled generously over every onion slice. Italian seasoning was sprinkled across the top along with garlic powder and black pepper. Shredded Parmesan cheese covered the onions completely. Shredded mozzarella cheese was layered on top of the Parmesan. More Italian seasoning was sprinkled over the cheese. Crushed Ritz crackers mixed with melted butter formed the final topping layer. It baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 35 minutes until the onion softened and the cheese melted into golden, bubbly pools. The onions became sweet and tender, almost caramelized at the edges. Corn casserole appeared at every holiday table across the Midwest and South, where it blurred the line between bread and vegetable in the most delicious way possible. This recipe came from the back of Jiffy corn muffin mix boxes in the 1970s and was immediately adopted by busy homemakers. A box of Jiffy corn muffin mix was dumped into a large mixing bowl. A can of whole kernel corn was added without draining. A can of creamed corn went in next, providing extra moisture and sweetness. Eggs were beaten and stirred into the corn mixture. Melted butter was added for richness. Sour cream was folded in to create tanginess and keep everything moist during baking. The batter was poured into a buttered casserole dish. Some families added shredded cheddar cheese to the batter for extra flavor. Others sprinkled cheese on top halfway through baking. It baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes until the top turned golden brown and a toothpick inserted in the center came out clean. The texture was softer than cornbread, but firmer than pudding, almost spoon bread consistency. The edges got slightly crispy and caramelized. 15 casseroles that defined American home cooking before convenience took over completely. From noodle kugel to corn casserole, each recipe told stories of immigration, adaptation, and survival. These dishes weren't fancy. They were practical. They fed families when budgets were tight and time was precious. 15 more still wait. Scalloped corn brought elegance to simple corn when families needed a side dish that looked fancier than the effort required to make it. This recipe came from farmhouse kitchens across the Midwest during the 1950s when corn was abundant and creativity was necessary. Cans of whole kernel corn were drained and set aside. Eggs were beaten in a large bowl until frothy. Milk was whisked into the eggs along with melted butter. Saltine crackers were crushed into fine crumbs and stirred into the egg mixture. The drained corn was folded in gently. Diced onion added savory depth. Diced red bell pepper provided color and sweetness. Salt, black pepper, and a pinch of sugar seasoned everything. The mixture was poured into a buttered casserole dish. More crushed crackers were mixed with melted butter and sprinkled across the top. It baked at 350 degrees for 35 minutes until the custard set and the top turned golden brown. The texture was similar to corn pudding, but firmer, almost like a savory bread pudding. Chicken casserole d'Iberville carried a French name but originated in Mississippi, where Gulf Coast flavors merged with church supper practicality during the 1960s. This recipe appeared in junior league cookbooks across the South. Cooked chicken was diced into bite-sized pieces and spread across a buttered casserole dish. White rice was cooked until tender, then mixed with cream of mushroom soup and cream of chicken soup. Diced onions and chopped celery were sauteed in butter until soft, then stirred into the rice mixture. A can of sliced mushrooms was added along with a liquid for extra flavor. Chicken broth was stirred in to make the mixture creamy, but not too thick. The rice mixture was spread over the chicken in the casserole dish. Shredded cheddar cheese covered the rice layer. French fried onions from a can were scattered across the cheese. It baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheese melted and the onions turned golden brown. Oyster casserole appeared at Christmas Eve celebrations along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts, where seafood traditions ran deep in family histories. This recipe came from coastal grandmothers who remembered when oysters were cheap and plentiful rather than luxury items. Cans of whole oysters were drained, reserving the liquid for later use. Saltine crackers were crushed into coarse crumbs and divided into portions. Melted butter was drizzled over the cracker crumbs and tossed until every crumb glistened. A layer of buttered crackers went into the bottom of a greased casserole dish. Half the oysters were arranged over the crackers in a single layer. Salt and black pepper seasoned the oysters. Another layer of buttered crackers went on top. The remaining oysters were arranged on the crackers. Heavy cream was mixed with the reserved oyster liquid and poured over everything. Crunchy spinach casserole convinced children to eat their greens when plain boiled spinach sat untouched on dinner plates across America. This recipe came from church cookbooks in the 1970s, when cream of mushroom soup solved most cooking challenges. Frozen chopped spinach was thawed and squeezed completely dry using clean kitchen towels to remove every drop of water. Cream of mushroom soup was mixed with sour cream until smooth. A can of sliced water chestnuts was drained and stirred into the soup mixture. The dried spinach was folded in along with dried onion flakes and garlic powder. Shredded cheddar cheese was mixed through the spinach. Everything went into a buttered casserole dish. French fried onions were crushed lightly and spread across the top. It baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the sauce bubbled and the onions turned deep golden brown. The water chestnuts provided an unexpected crunch that made every bite interesting. Chicken and broccoli bake combined two ingredients children typically resisted into one casserole they'd actually request for dinner throughout the week. It came from church cookbooks in the 1980s, when parents needed strategies to get vegetables onto plates. Broccoli florets were steamed until just tender but still bright green, then drained completely. Cooked chicken breast was diced into bite-sized pieces. Cream of chicken soup was mixed with mayonnaise and a squeeze of fresh lemon juice. Sour cream was stirred into the soup mixture along with curry powder that added warmth without obvious spice. The steamed broccoli was arranged in a single layer across a buttered casserole dish. The diced chicken was scattered over the broccoli. The creamy sauce was poured over everything, coating the chicken and broccoli completely. Shredded cheddar cheese covered the sauce layer. Breadcrumbs were mixed with melted butter and sprinkled across the cheese. 20 heirloom casseroles documented. From noodle kugel to chicken and broccoli bake, these dishes carried stories of coastal traditions, Midwestern practicality, and Southern ingenuity. They weren't complicated. They were solutions to feeding families affordably. 10 more casseroles wait to complete this collection of forgotten American food history. Sweet potato pudding appeared on Southern Thanksgiving tables, where it occupied the contested space between vegetable side dish and dessert that sparked family debates every November. This recipe came from plantation kitchens and slave quarters, where sweet potatoes grew abundantly and creativity transformed them into celebration food during the 1800s, then traveled through generations of handwritten cards into church cookbooks across the South. Sweet potatoes were scrubbed clean, pricked with a fork, and baked until soft enough to mash easily with minimal effort. The skins were peeled away while the potatoes were still warm. The flesh was mashed until smooth and free of lumps. Melted butter was beaten into the warm, mashed sweet potatoes along with brown sugar that added molasses depth. Eggs were whisked and stirred into the sweet potato mixture to provide structure and richness. Heavy cream or evaporated milk was added for extra smoothness and to make the mixture pourable. Vanilla extract, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a pinch of salt seasoned everything perfectly. The mixture was poured into a buttered casserole dish and smoothed into an even layer. It baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the pudding set but still had slight jiggle in the center. While the pudding baked, the topping was prepared. Miniature marshmallows were scattered across the top of the partially baked pudding. The casserole returned to the oven for 10 more minutes until the marshmallows melted, puffed up, and turned golden brown on top. Some families torched the marshmallow topping with a kitchen torch for extra caramelization and dramatic presentation. The texture was somewhere between pumpkin pie filling and bread pudding, custardy and smooth. The marshmallow topping added sweetness and visual appeal that made it special. The whole casserole cost under $4 when sweet potatoes were in season and cost practically nothing. Some families topped it with chopped pecans mixed with brown sugar and butter instead of marshmallows for less sweetness and more sophistication. Others added orange zest to the sweet potato mixture for brightness. Sweet potato pudding appeared in every Southern church fundraiser cookbook under various names like sweet potato casserole, candied yams, or sweet potato souffle, depending on regional preferences and family traditions. The recipe represented African American culinary contributions to American food culture that elevated humble vegetables into celebratory dishes through technique, patience, and understanding of how sugar, spice, and heat could transform simple ingredients into something that felt luxurious and special enough for the most important family gatherings and holiday celebrations. Lima bean and marshmallow casserole confused every newcomer at church potlucks who encountered this strange Midwestern tradition that combined beans with marshmallows in ways that defied culinary logic. This recipe originated in farming communities during the 1920s when lima beans grew abundantly in kitchen gardens and marshmallows represented affordable luxury that transformed ordinary vegetables into something children might actually eat without complaint. Dried lima beans were soaked overnight in cold water until they plumped up and softened enough to cook properly. The soaked beans were drained and placed in a large pot with fresh water. They were simmered until tender but not mushy, usually about 45 minutes depending on the age of the beans. The cooked beans were drained and spread across the bottom of a buttered casserole dish. Brown sugar was sprinkled generously over the beans, coating them in a layer of sweetness. Butter was cut into small pieces and dotted across the brown sugar layer. Strips of bacon were laid across the top of the beans in a crisscross pattern, though this was often omitted in later versions to keep the dish vegetarian or halal. The casserole was covered with aluminum foil and baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the brown sugar melted and caramelized slightly. The foil was removed, and miniature marshmallows were scattered across the entire surface. The casserole returned to the oven uncovered for another 15 minutes until the marshmallows melted, puffed, and turned golden brown on top. The combination was simultaneously sweet and savory, confusing taste buds in ways that either delighted or horrified, depending on family traditions and personal preferences about whether vegetables should ever be sweetened this dramatically. The whole casserole cost under $3 when using dried beans from the pantry. The bacon added smokiness but wasn't essential to the dish's identity. Some families skipped the marshmallows entirely and just made the brown sugar butter version. Others doubled the marshmallows because children refused to eat it any other way. Lima bean and marshmallow casserole appeared primarily in Midwestern church cookbooks and junior league collections. It represented Depression-era creativity when families needed to make garden vegetables appealing enough that nothing went to waste. The recipe sparked strong opinions at every potluck. People either loved it for nostalgic childhood memories or hated it for violating culinary boundaries. But everyone agreed it was uniquely American in its willingness to combine ingredients that never appeared together in any other food culture anywhere in the world. Hamburger macaroni casserole fed families on tight budgets throughout the 1960s when 1 pound of ground beef needed to stretch across an entire week of dinners. This recipe appeared in community cookbooks under dozens of different names like Poor Man's Meal, Budget Supper, or simply Beef and Macaroni. But the formula remained consistent across regional variations and family traditions. Ground beef was browned in a large skillet with diced onions until the meat lost its pink color and the onions turned translucent and fragrant. The beef was drained of excess grease, then returned to the pan. Elbow macaroni was cooked in salted boiling water until just tender, then drained thoroughly. Canned tomato soup was stirred into the cooked ground beef, along with a can of diced tomatoes, including all the juice. Worcestershire sauce added savory depth. Garlic powder, dried oregano, salt, and black pepper seasoned everything simply but effectively. The cooked macaroni was folded into the beef and tomato mixture until every noodle was coated. The entire mixture was transferred to a buttered casserole dish and spread into an even layer. Shredded cheddar cheese covered the top completely. Some families mixed cottage cheese into the beef and macaroni before baking for extra creaminess and protein. Others added a layer of sliced American cheese under the cheddar for different flavor. It baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheese melted and turned golden brown around the edges where it touched the sides of the dish. The casserole bubbled at the edges, and the whole kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of tomato, cheese, and beef. The whole dish cost under $3 and fed a family of 6 with enough leftovers for school lunches the next day. Hamburger macaroni casserole could be assembled in the morning and refrigerated, then baked later after work. It could be frozen in portions and reheated on busy weeknights. The recipe appeared in church fundraiser cookbooks, on index cards tucked into community collections, and in the memories of everyone who grew up in working-class neighborhoods during the post-war decades. It represented American pragmatism at its finest, turning the cheapest cuts of meat and basic pantry staples into something that satisfied hunger and brought families together around tables where conversation mattered more than fancy ingredients or complicated techniques that required culinary school training or expensive equipment that most families couldn't afford during those decades. Mama's chicken and rice appeared on kitchen tables across Appalachia and the rural South, where grandmothers cooked with intuition rather than measuring cups and passed recipes through demonstration instead of written cards. This casserole represented the ultimate in comfort food simplicity, requiring only chicken, rice, and cream of mushroom soup to create something that fed families completely. Bone-in chicken pieces, usually thighs and drumsticks because they cost less and stayed moister during baking, were arranged in a single layer across a greased casserole dish. The chicken was seasoned generously with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and paprika that would create a flavorful crust during baking. Uncooked long-grain white rice was sprinkled around the chicken pieces, settling into the spaces between. Cream of mushroom soup was mixed with water or chicken broth until it reached pourable consistency. Some grandmothers added a packet of dry onion soup mix to the liquid for extra flavor. The soup mixture was poured over the chicken and rice, making sure the rice was completely covered with liquid so it would cook properly. The casserole was covered tightly with aluminum foil to trap steam that would cook the rice. It baked at 350 degrees for 1 hour without peeking or stirring. After an hour, the foil was carefully removed and a casserole baked for another 15 minutes to let the chicken skin crisp up and turn golden brown. The rice absorbed all the liquid along with the chicken drippings and soup, becoming incredibly flavorful. Each grain was tender and coated with savory sauce. The chicken fell off the bone. The skin was crispy and golden. The whole casserole cost under $5 and fed 6 people. Mama's chicken and rice required no pre-cooking, no browning, no complicated steps. Everything went into one dish raw and came out perfectly cooked through the magic of proper timing and temperature. This was the casserole grandmothers made when they were tired, when money was tight, when comfort mattered more than impressing anyone. The recipe appeared in church cookbooks with minimal instructions because everyone already knew how to make it. Variations existed across families. Some added frozen peas during the last 15 minutes of baking. Others used cream of chicken soup instead of mushroom. But the essential formula remained constant. Chicken, rice, canned soup, thyme, and heat transformed into the kind of meal that made grandchildren remember their childhoods as warmer and safer than they probably were in reality. Beef and biscuit casserole combined ground beef filling with fluffy biscuit topping to create the casserole version of pot pie that required far less effort and skill than actual pastry. This recipe circulated through farming communities during the 1950s when women needed dinners that satisfied hungry men without requiring hours of preparation time or fancy techniques learned in cooking schools. Ground beef was browned in a large skillet with diced onions and chopped celery until the vegetables softened and the meat developed deep brown color. The beef was drained of excess grease, then returned to the pan. Frozen mixed vegetables, usually peas, carrots, corn, and green beans, were stirred into the beef mixture. Cream of mushroom soup was added along with beef broth to create sauce that would bind everything together. Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, salt, and black pepper seasoned the filling simply. The beef and vegetable mixture was simmered for 5 minutes to let flavors blend, then transferred to a buttered casserole dish. Meanwhile, refrigerated biscuit dough from a tube was separated into individual biscuits. Some cooks used homemade biscuit dough when they had time and ingredients. The biscuits were arranged across the top of the beef mixture, leaving small gaps between so steam could escape during baking. Melted butter was brushed across the tops of the biscuits. Shredded cheddar cheese was sprinkled over the biscuits for extra richness. The casserole baked at 375 degrees for 25 minutes until the biscuits puffed up, turned golden brown, and cooked through completely. The filling bubbled up around the edges of the biscuits. The biscuit tops stayed fluffy and light, while the bottoms absorbed some of the savory sauce. The whole casserole cost under $4 and fed a family of 6. Beef and biscuit casserole could be assembled ahead and refrigerated, though the biscuits were added just before baking so they didn't get soggy. Leftover pot roast could replace the ground beef for different flavor. 25 casseroles that carried American food history in every creamy, cheesy layer. From sweet potato pudding to beef and biscuit casserole, each dish solved problems about feeding families affordably. These recipes weren't about impressing anyone. They were about survival, comfort, and making ordinary ingredients extraordinary. Cabbage roll casserole deconstructed the labor-intensive Eastern European tradition of individually rolled cabbage leaves into simplified casserole form that delivered the same flavors with fraction of the effort. This recipe came from Polish, Ukrainian, and Hungarian immigrant communities who adapted their homeland traditions to American kitchens during the 1960s, when time became more precious than maintaining complicated old-world techniques. A head of green cabbage was cored and chopped into bite-sized pieces rather than carefully separated into individual leaves for rolling. The chopped cabbage was boiled in salted water for about 10 minutes until it softened but still retained some texture. The cabbage was drained thoroughly and set aside to cool. Ground beef was browned in a large skillet with diced onions until the meat developed good color. Uncooked white rice was stirred into the beef along with tomato sauce, diced tomatoes, and a splash of Worcestershire sauce. Salmon loaf transformed canned salmon into elegant main dish that appeared at Friday night dinners when Catholic households needed meatless meals that felt substantial and satisfying. This recipe came from coastal communities during the 1940s and 1950s when canned salmon remained affordable and accessible even during rationing and tight budgets. Cans of pink salmon were drained thoroughly and flaked with a fork, removing any obvious bones and skin, though many cooks left the soft bones in for added calcium. The salmon was placed in a large mixing bowl. Saltine crackers were crushed into fine crumbs and stirred into the salmon. Eggs were beaten and added to bind everything together. Finely diced onion and celery provided texture and aromatic depth. Fresh lemon juice brightened the fish flavor. Worcestershire sauce added savory complexity. salt, and black pepper seasoned simply. Melted butter was stirred in for richness and to help the mixture hold together during baking. Everything was mixed thoroughly until completely combined. The mixture was shaped into a loaf and placed in a greased loaf pan. American chop suey had nothing to do with Chinese food despite its name, representing instead New England's unique contribution to American casserole tradition that confused everyone outside the Northeast who expected something Asian. This recipe originated in Massachusetts during the 1940s and spread throughout New England, where it fed families cheaply and appeared on school lunch menus for decades. Ground beef was browned in a large skillet with diced onions and chopped green bell peppers until the vegetables softened and the meat developed good color. The beef was drained of excess fat, then returned to the pan. Elbow macaroni was cooked in salted boiling water until just tender, then drained thoroughly. Canned tomato sauce was stirred into the beef and vegetables, along with diced tomatoes, including all the juice. Italian seasoning, garlic powder, a pinch of sugar to balance acidity, salt, and black pepper seasoned the sauce simply. The cooked macaroni was folded into the tomato and beef mixture until every noodle was coated with sauce. The entire mixture was transferred to a buttered casserole dish and spread into an even layer. Some families stopped there and served it immediately as stovetop meal. Others topped it with shredded cheddar or mozzarella cheese and baked it at 350 degrees for 20 minutes until the cheese melted and turned golden. The name supposedly came from the dish being chopped and mixed together, though the real origin remained disputed among New England food historians. Some claimed it was restaurant workers' meal made from leftover ingredients. Others insisted it was Depression-era adaptation of Hungarian goulash. The true origin mattered less than the fact that generations of New England children grew up eating this regularly at home and school. The whole casserole cost under $3 and fed a family of 6 with leftovers. American chop suey could be made ahead and reheated, actually tasting better the next day after flavors melded together overnight. It could be frozen in portions and reheated for quick weeknight dinners. The recipe appeared in New England church cookbooks and school cafeteria collections. It represented regional food identity that outsiders found baffling, but locals defended fiercely. Transplanted New Englanders craved it when living elsewhere. Trying to order it outside Massachusetts resulted in confusion and disappointment. Chicken broccoli and rice casserole combined 3 ingredients children typically resisted into one dish they'd actually request for dinner throughout the week when properly disguised under cheese and cream sauce. This recipe came from church cookbooks in the 1980s when parents needed strategies to get complete nutrition onto plates without nightly battles. Boneless chicken breasts were cut into bite-sized pieces and seasoned with salt and black pepper. The chicken was browned lightly in butter until just cooked through, then set aside. Broccoli florets were steamed until bright green and just tender, then drained completely to prevent watery casserole. Uncooked long-grain white rice was spread across the bottom of a buttered casserole dish in an even layer. Cream of chicken soup was mixed with milk or chicken broth until smooth and pourable. A can of cream of mushroom soup was stirred into the chicken soup mixture for extra richness and flavor complexity. Shredded cheddar cheese was folded into the soup mixture, reserving some for topping. The cooked chicken pieces were scattered over the uncooked rice. The steamed broccoli was distributed evenly throughout, tucking florets between chicken pieces. The creamy soup mixture was poured over everything, making sure the rice was completely covered with liquid so it would cook properly during baking. More shredded cheddar cheese covered the top completely. The casserole was covered tightly with aluminum foil to trap steam. It baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes until the rice absorbed all the liquid and became tender. The foil was removed during the last 10 minutes to let the cheese on top brown slightly. The finished casserole had rice that absorbed all the chicken and soup flavors, becoming incredibly savory. The broccoli maintained slight texture rather than turning to mush. The chicken stayed moist throughout. The cheese created golden brown patches on top. The whole casserole cost around $5 and fed a family of 6. Chicken, broccoli, and rice casserole could be assembled in the morning and refrigerated, then baked after work for easy weeknight dinner. Turkey tetrazzini appeared on tables across America the Monday after Thanksgiving when families needed creative ways to use leftover turkey that everyone was already tired of eating plain. This recipe originated in San Francisco during the early 1900s, supposedly named after Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, who performed there frequently, though the dish itself was entirely American in execution and ingredients. Spaghetti was cooked in salted boiling water until just tender, then drained thoroughly. Leftover turkey was shredded or diced into bite-sized pieces, though chicken worked equally well when turkey wasn't available. Butter was melted in a large skillet and used to saute sliced mushrooms until they released their moisture and developed golden color. Diced onions were added and cooked until soft and translucent. Flour was sprinkled over the mushrooms and onions, stirring constantly to create a roux. Chicken or turkey broth was added gradually, whisking constantly to prevent lumps from forming. Heavy cream was stirred in along with a generous splash of dry sherry that added sophisticated depth and complexity. The sauce was seasoned with salt, white pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg. Shredded Parmesan cheese was stirred into the sauce until melted and incorporated. The cooked spaghetti and turkey were folded into the creamy sauce until everything was evenly coated. The mixture was transferred to a buttered casserole dish. More Parmesan cheese was sprinkled across the top along with breadcrumbs mixed with melted butter. It baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the sauce bubbled around the edges and the breadcrumb topping turned golden brown. The sherry added wine flavor that made guests think you'd worked much harder than you actually had. The mushrooms provided earthy depth. The cream sauce was rich, but the brightness from sherry kept it from feeling too heavy. The whole casserole cost around $4 when using leftover turkey that would otherwise go to waste. Turkey tetrazzini appeared in junior league cookbooks and church fundraiser collections throughout the 20th century. It represented American adaptation of Italian pasta techniques combined with French cream sauce methodology to create something distinctly American. 30 forgotten heirloom casseroles that sustained America through decades when handwritten recipe cards mattered more than celebrity chefs and viral cooking videos. From husband's delight to turkey tetrazzini, each dish represented more than just dinner. These casseroles were survival strategies disguised as comfort food. They stretched tight budgets into meals that fed entire families. They transformed humble ingredients into dishes that brought communities together at church suppers and potlucks. They carried immigrant traditions forward while adapting to American kitchens and ingredients.